I mean, usually when you're dealing with a medical diagnosis, there's a certain expectation of precision. Like if you fall and break your arm, you go to the hospital, and the X-ray shows that stark, jagged white line across the bone.
Right, exactly. The doctor just points to the screen and says, there's the problem.
Yeah. It's visible. It's measurable.
It's entirely objective. I mean,
Yeah.
the bone is fractured, and the treatment protocol for that specific fracture is universally agreed upon.
Right. And as patients, we rely on that objectivity. We expect our healthcare systems to operate with that kind of, I don't know, mechanical clarity.
Mm-hmm.
But when you step out of orthopedics and into the world of maternal mental health, that diagnostic machinery just it completely breaks down.
Yeah, it really does.
You're no longer looking at clear X-rays. You're navigating this deeply murky landscape, relying almost entirely on trial, error, and self-reporting. And when those diagnostics fail, I mean, the consequences aren't just a bone healing incorrectly. The consequences can be catastrophic.
And that is the core of what we are examining today in this deep dive.
Yeah.
We are pulling from a stack of legal complaints, medical advocacy blogs, psychiatric standards, and academic law journals to look at a massive systemic breakdown that occurred in Duxbury, Massachusetts.
But I want to set a really strict rule for how we're approaching this today.
Okay.
The true crime genre has a really bad habit of obsessing over the perpetrator.
Absolutely. They become the main character.
Exactly. The person who commits the crime becomes the protagonist, and the victims are treated like secondary details, like they're just the inciting incident for some fascinating psychological profile. And we are not doing that today.
No, we're not.
Today is about the victims. It's about the aftermath for the survivors, and it's about the broken medical and legal systems that failed a family.
And if we're centering the victims, we really need to begin with who they were before any of this happened.
Yeah. Cora, Dawson, and Callan Clancy.
3 kids living on the South Shore of Massachusetts.
Cora was 5 years old. Like, that age where you have strong opinions and a personality that just fills the whole house. Dawson was 3. And Callan was just 8 months old. His life was just barely beginning.
They lived in a quiet coastal town in a home built by their father, Patrick Clancy, who, by all accounts, oriented his entire life around his family.
He really did.
Yeah.
And to really understand this, we need to look at a snapshot of their final morning, which was January 24th, 2023.
Yeah, it was a snowy Tuesday, and there was nothing outwardly alarming at all. Cora actually had a routine pediatric visit that morning, where medical staff noted everything appeared, completely normal.
Right.
The kids spent the day playing in the snow with their mother. They built a snowman. Photos were texted to family members. It was, from the outside, just a typical winter day for a family with young kids.
Which is why the facts of that evening are just so deeply jarring. And I want to be clear to you listening, we are not going to wade into gratuitous graphic details here.
No.
The audience doesn't need sensory language to understand a tragedy.
Factually, that evening, Patrick left the house for a very brief window. He was just picking up takeout from a local restaurant and a children's medication from CVS.
Right.
And when he returned, he found his 3 children in the basement. They had been strangled with exercise bands.
It's unbearable.
It is. Cora and Dawson passed away that night. Baby Callan was airlifted to Boston Children's Hospital, and he held on for 3 days before passing away.
And the perpetrator was their mother.
Yes. Who had attempted suicide that same evening by jumping from a second-story window.
Something like this, it just leaves a crater in a community. And typically, in the immediate aftermath of something this incomprehensible, the public reaction and often the family's reaction is a demand for immediate vengeance.
Right, which is an understandable human response.
Of course. But Patrick Clancy did something that completely shocked the public. He released a statement on a GoFundMe page where he called Cora, Dawson, and Callan the essence of his life. And then he asked the public to forgive his wife, just as he had.
Which is just a profound statement.
I mean, how do you even find that kind of grace in that moment?
Well, it wasn't just a blind, abstract act of grace, actually. Patrick's forgiveness was rooted in his immediate, real-time understanding that his family had been the victim of a catastrophic medical failure.
Right.
He recognized that the mother of his children had entirely lost her grip on reality. She was suffering from an untreated, severe psychiatric illness that had been spiraling out of control for months.
Under the supervision of medical professionals.
Exactly.
It is staggering to think about a grieving father holding those two realities in his mind at the exact same time. Like the unbearable, world-ending loss of his children alongside the knowledge that the person who caused it was essentially swallowed whole by a medical crisis.
It really forces you to look away from the crime scene itself.
Yeah. It makes you realize that the danger wasn't lurking in an alleyway somewhere. It was quietly compounding in the waiting rooms of the doctors tasked with keeping this family safe.
Which pivots us directly to the civil malpractice lawsuit filed by Patrick Clancy against those treating medical providers.
All right, let's unpack that.
The legal complaint names Dr. Jennifer Tufts, nurse practitioner Rebecca Gelada, and Astor Mental Health. And the factual claims outlined in this suit, they map a terrifying timeline of prescribing practices.
I was reading through the complaint, and the sheer volume of what was happening medically is, it's difficult to even comprehend. Over the course of roughly 4 months, from September 2022 to January 2023, the perpetrator was prescribed 13 different psychiatric medications for anxiety and insomnia.
13 in 4 months.
We are talking about a rapidly rotating cocktail that included Zoloft, Prozac, Seroquel, Valium, Klonopin, Ambien, and others. I mean, it's a massive amount of drugs.
And to understand why that is so dangerous, we have to look at how these medications actually function in the brain.
Break that down for us.
Well, you have SSRIs like Zoloft and Prozac, which are designed to increase serotonin levels. Then you have an antipsychotic like Seroquel, which alters dopamine and serotonin receptors. And then you have benzodiazepines like Valium and Klonopin, which are central nervous system depressants. When you introduce 13 different chemical variables into a human brain over just a few months, you aren't just treating a symptom anymore. You're creating a chaotic chemical cascade.
I'm trying to picture the mechanics of that, because if you're rapidly starting and stopping medications that alter how your neurons fire, your brain doesn't just instantly reset.
Exactly, it doesn't. These drugs have different half-lives, meaning they stay in your system for varying lengths of time.
Right.
If you stop one medication and start another 2 days later, that first drug is still actively altering your brain chemistry while the new drug begins to interact with it.
Which sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It is. This can lead to severe paradoxical reactions. So instead of calming anxiety, it can induce extreme agitation, panic, and completely detach a person from reality.
Wow.
That is why in psychiatry, there is a foundational, non-negotiable principle. It's called start low and go slow.
Meaning, you introduce one medication at a very minimal dose, wait to see the effect, and only then make adjustments.
Yes.
But the lawsuit alleges these providers completely ignored that standard of care.
The complaint claims they rapidly increased dosages and stacked conflicting medications, even though the patient was reporting severe adverse reactions.
What's the kind of reaction?
We're talking about extreme insomnia, where she was sleeping maybe 3 hours a night, emotional numbness, and intrusive thoughts. And a massive piece of this systemic failure, according to the lawsuit, is that the providers never performed blood plasma work.
Wait, I'm stuck on that. Why is blood work the deciding factor when prescribing a psychiatric pill? I thought psychiatrists just, adjusted based on how you say you're feeling.
That's a very common misconception, but blood work is critical because of liver enzymes, specifically the cytochrome P450 enzymes.
Okay.
These enzymes determine how fast your body metabolizes a drug. If you're a fast metabolizer, the drug clears your system too quickly to be effective. But if you're a slow metabolizer, a standard dose builds up in your bloodstream and quickly becomes highly toxic.
Oh my God.
You cannot know how a patient is metabolizing 13 different heavy psychiatric drugs without checking their blood.
So they were essentially prescribing blind.
Basically, yes.
And the lawsuit alleges that instead of bringing her into a clinic, checking her vitals, and doing that blood work, they conducted a series of virtual appointments.
Right. Telehealth.
And some of these Zoom calls reportedly lasted only 17 minutes.
Which eliminates the ability to read crucial nonverbal cues. On a 17-minute video call, a provider cannot adequately assess a patient's motor function, their subtle eye movements, or the physical tremors that often indicate severe medication toxicity.
It is deeply unnerving to think that the safety net for a family in crisis was a 17-minute video chat.
It really is.
But as much as this lawsuit focuses on the failures of specific individuals, your research pulled up a much broader, deeply ingrained structural gap in the medical field itself.
Yeah, I looked into the medical advocacy work from the Postpartum Support International, or PSI, blog, and they point to a massive systemic blind spot regarding postpartum psychosis, or PPP.
And this is different from postpartum depression, right?
Very different. This is a severe emergent condition where a mother loses touch with reality, experiencing delusions or hallucinations. It occurs in roughly 1 to 2 out of every 1,000 births.
To put that in perspective for you listening, that is roughly the exact same statistical rate as Down syndrome or cerebral palsy.
Exactly.
It is not an anomaly. It is a known statistical reality of childbirth.
It has been documented since the days of Hippocrates. But here is the critical failure. Postpartum psychosis is not recognized as a standalone diagnosis in the DSM.
The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the literal rulebook of psychiatry. I mean, why on earth would a condition that affects thousands of women every year be left out of the manual?
Historically, the psychiatric establishment has just lumped it in as a mere subspecifier of bipolar disorder or major depression.
But that doesn't fit, does it?
No, advocates argue this fundamentally misunderstands the illness. PPP is unique because of its incredibly rapid onset, which is triggered by the massive, immediate hormonal crash that occurs in the days and weeks right after childbirth.
Right.
By refusing to give it a standalone diagnosis, the DSM creates a devastating ripple effect.
Because if it's not in the book, it doesn't officially exist for insurance billing, and it doesn't get prioritized in medical school curriculums.
Precisely. It leads to general provider ignorance. If a provider isn't trained to look for the sudden onset of postpartum psychosis as a unique medical emergency, they misdiagnose it.
Yeah.
They see the insomnia and the panic, and they treat it as general anxiety. They throw a massive combination of pills at the symptoms, completely missing the underlying psychotic break.
So if we look at this like an analogy, it's like a chemist throwing 13 different highly reactive elements into a beaker to fix a simple imbalance without ever checking the temperature or monitoring the reaction until the beaker simply shatters.
That's a tragically accurate way to describe it.
And when the medical system shatters a family, the pieces are left to be swept up by the legal system. Which brings us to how the legal framework handles a tragedy rooted in severe mental illness.
Right. The defense in this case is relying on the legal concept of lack of criminal responsibility. This is what Massachusetts calls the insanity defense.
I read through the district court model criminal jury instructions from Massachusetts on this, and I was genuinely surprised by how the burden of proof is structured. It is completely counterintuitive.
Most people assume that if you claim an insanity defense, your lawyers have to prove you are insane.
Right, that's what I thought.
But in Massachusetts, the law states that once the defense raises the issue, the burden rests entirely on the state. The prosecution must prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the perpetrator was sane.
Okay, wait, let's look at the mechanics of that. The state has to prove she didn't suffer from a mental disease.
That is one route. They must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she did not have a mental disease or defect.
But given the extensive medical history here, that is unlikely.
Very unlikely. So they rely on the second route. The state must prove that even if she did suffer from a mental illness, she still retained the substantial capacity to either appreciate the wrongfulness of her conduct or to conform her conduct to the law.
I have to challenge how a prosecutor or a jury is supposed to actually measure that. I mean, how does a legal system retroactively measure the precise mental capacity of a person on a random Tuesday, months or years after the fact?
It's incredibly difficult.
Especially when we just established that her brain was swimming in 13 mismanaged prescription medications. How do you separate the underlying illness from the medication toxicity to determine substantial capacity?
Well, that's exactly why forensic psychiatry exists.
Oh.
Prosecutors rely heavily on digital footprints and behavioral timelines to try and establish logic and premeditation.
Like what in this case?
For example, the prosecution pointed out that she used Apple Maps on her phone to calculate how long it would take her husband to pick up the takeout food. They argue that calculating distance and time proves she was tethered to reality and understood what she was doing.
But couldn't the defense just argue that someone in the middle of a psychotic break can still perform rote tasks? I mean, using a GPS doesn't mean your fundamental perception of reality isn't completely fractured by a disease.
That is exactly the defense's counter-argument. They argue those actions were carried out by a brain completely hijacked by severe illness and over-medication.
Right.
And, the reality of this legal process is incredibly grim. Following her suicide attempt that night, the perpetrator was permanently paralyzed from the waist down.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she has been hospitalized at Tewksbury Hospital for over a year, appearing at her arraignments via Zoom from a hospital bed. The legal system is attempting to force a rigid, binary question, sane or insane, onto a deeply complex, medically induced psychological collapse.
But as much as we talk about the rigid framework of the law, the academic research you pulled shows that these cases aren't actually decided by legal statutes or medical science alone, are they?
No, they really aren't.
The success or failure of a mental health defense heavily relies on public sympathy, and that sympathy is definitely not distributed equally.
This is where we look at an excerpt from the Harvard Journal of Law and Gender. The journal provides really impartial, critical analysis of how the public and the justice system react to postpartum psychosis cases.
And they use a specific term for it.
Yes. They call it the public opinion gloss.
Explain the public opinion gloss. How does that actually work in a courtroom?
Because the legal definitions of insanity are so rigid, and because postpartum psychosis is so medically complex, juries and prosecutors often find the law insufficient.
Yeah.
So they apply a gloss of public opinion and sympathy over the case to reach an outcome that feels just to them. In the Duxbury case, the public opinion gloss has been massively sympathetic.
Right. The GoFundMe raised over $1 million. There are millions of views on TikTok under maternal mental health hashtags defending her. Dozens of medical professionals and fellow mothers have written letters of support to the court. The public recognized the systemic medical failure and extended incredible grace.
But the Harvard Journal highlights a stark, deeply troubling contrast. They analyze the cases of several other mothers who exhibited the exact same clear symptoms of postpartum psychosis, but received drastically different treatment from both the media and the justice system.
Who are the other mothers the journal focuses on?
They outline the case of Sonia Hermosillo. She was a mother without health insurance who couldn't afford her prescribed psychiatric medications.
Oh, man.
When her untreated illness resulted in tragedy, she wasn't met with $1 million support fund. She was convicted and sentenced to life in prison.
And the journal also mentions Aaliyah Newell, right?
Yes. Aaliyah Newell suffered a severe postpartum break. She was held without bail. A GoFundMe was set up not for legal defense, but simply to help her family bury the children.
And how much did that raise?
It raised exactly $20.
$20. Jesus.
The journal also highlights Erin Murdy and Damone Fleming, women who faced murder charges and intense public vitriol. In their cases, there is almost zero media conversation about their severe mental health struggles or the systemic failures in their healthcare access.
Let's talk about the underlying mechanics of that disparity. Because why does one tragedy spark a national movement for maternal mental health awareness, while another, with the exact same pathology, just results in a life sentence and public hatred?
The academic concept presented in the journal applies what sociologists call missing white woman syndrome directly to the justice system.
Okay.
Their research concludes that affluent white mothers are frequently viewed by society, the media, and juries as relatable victims of a tragic medical illness. They are seen as fundamentally worth saving, so the assumption of medical context is automatically extended to them.
While women of color and low-income women who suffer from the exact same severe psychiatric illnesses are stripped of that medical context?
Exactly. They are framed simply as violent criminals. The illness is ignored, and the system focuses purely on punishment.
I want to be really clear about the takeaway here. The immense public support and empathy for maternal mental health in the Clancy case is a genuinely positive thing.
Absolutely.
It represents societal progress. It shows that we are finally starting to understand that a mental health crisis is a medical emergency, not a moral failing. But the deep injustice is that this empathy operates like an exclusive VIP club.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
A fair justice system and a functional healthcare system cannot require $1 million GoFundMe or the right demographic profile just to recognize a medical emergency.
The pathology of postpartum psychosis does not discriminate by race or class. It is a biological response. But the empathy of the public and the application of the law frequently do.
Which brings us back to why we opened the files on this case to begin with. We have walked through a devastating failure of medical prescribing practices, where a patient was flooded with 13 conflicting medications and monitored over 17-minute screens. We've looked at the stubborn refusal of the DSM to recognize a condition that affects thousands of mothers.
Yeah.
And we've explored a legal system that attempts to retroactively measure sanity while applying empathy through a lens of extreme societal bias.
It is a compounding series of systemic failures that ultimately resulted in the loss of 3 children.
Cora, Dawson, and Callan Clancy.
Yeah.
Their legacy cannot just be the horrific details of their passing. And their legacy certainly shouldn't be reduced to the ongoing legal fate of the mother who was failed by her doctors.
No, it shouldn't.
Their legacy has to be the urgent spotlight this tragedy leaves behind. It is a demand for maternal health care that actually monitors patients instead of just over-medicating them. It is a demand for the inclusion of postpartum psychosis in medical textbooks so doctors know what they're looking at.
Right.
And it's a demand for a justice system that looks at the root causes of systemic failure equally for everyone, regardless of their background.
If we truly want to honor victims, we have to look far beyond the immediate crime scene and critically examine the structures surrounding it.
Exactly.
So I want to leave you listening with a final thought to consider. We spend so much of our societal energy and resources arguing over how to punish people after the safety net fails. But what would it look like if we spent that same energy building communities and healthcare systems that catch struggling families before they reach the breaking point?
Yeah.
We have to weave a net that can actually hold the weight of a family in crisis.
We have to fix the diagnostic machinery before another family pays the price. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We appreciate you taking the time to focus on Cora, Dawson, and Callan, and to really understand the broken systems we all share a responsibility to improve. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.